Welcome and thanks for joining today's webinar on export self-filing, Sweden using SAP Global Trade Services. During our webinar, we'll give you an overview of implementing export self-filing solution and export compliance for Sweden using SAP GTS. On the next slide, today's speaker is Samuel Prabhakar. Sam is a SAP GTS consultant at Crypt. Sam has over 10 years experience in SAP GTS implementations, and his focus is on leading SAP GTS implementations and project management. On the next slide, I'll go through some quick housekeeping tips. If any questions come up during the webinar, please type your question into the panel as shown in the example. We will be addressing questions at the end of the presentation. On the next slide, I'd like to quickly introduce Crypt for those of you who are less familiar with us. Crypt was established in 2008 and is a leading SAP consulting partner. Although we operate globally, we consider ourselves a boutique consulting firm that lives by our founding principles of innovation, collaboration, and drive. These principles have allowed us to complete over 800,000 SAP consulting hours in various industries. Our services focus around implementations, upgrades, and customizations around various SAP solutions, including trade, transportation, warehouse, planning, IDP, and HANA. We also offer proprietary solutions, integration services, and work closely with SAP for ramp-ups and testing. On the next slide, I'd like to share some of our thought leadership. We strive to be thought leaders in the supply chain ecosystem. We've accomplished this by authoring books, in addition to writing blogs and white papers, which are available on our website. Moving on to the next slide. This is an overview of our proprietary offerings, which complements the SAP suite. I wanted to briefly highlight Crypt Connect, located in the middle of the solution list. This particular solution can be integrated with any non-SAP environment or ERP, which many of our customers find valuable. Moving on to the next slide. Over the years, we've had the opportunity to work with a variety of companies within the SAP supply chain space. Some of these are highlighted here. And at this point, I'd like to pass over to Sam. So away you go, Sam.
Thank you, Connor. Good morning, everyone. For today's webinar, our agenda is introduction into Swedish exports, an overview of the business case on using GTS for self-filing, and an introduction into the suite of SAP GTS and its offerings, finally going into the details of the implementation, and then we can discuss on any questions around export self-filing. Sweden is a member state of the EU. It has around, I think it's the fourth largest exporter or the fifth largest exporter. And when we say export, from a GTS perspective, for this project, what we considered is the export filing purpose. So it's export outside of the European Union. And our objective for this is generating export relevant documents like the commercial invoice, the certificate of origin, and then also export compliance from a licensing point of view. In terms of the business case for implementing GTS, a quick background about the business itself. The business has 3 plants in Sweden and 1 distribution center. And before using GTS, exports was managed through freight forwarder / broker. And GTS has already been implemented in other countries for the same company. So they have been doing export self-filing in Germany and France, but Sweden was still outside of GTS using brokers. While we did the business case, there were a few things that we considered. One is the the cost of savings that we would generate by switching from the broker to self-filing using GTS, including estimate the cost of GTS implementation and support and things like that. And that was a substantial savings of 215,000. In addition, moving the self-filing process in-house means better compliance. To achieve this, we had to consider a few things. One, we have to use a standard solution to the maximum, avoid any sort of additional enhancements within the GTS. Second thing is we had to bring in maximum automation within this so that there is no additional resourcing is needed from the existing team's point of view, the customs team point of view. So those were the two main criteria that we had. And also we decided to go in for an aggressive implementation plan. So part of the challenge is we wanted to achieve this implementation in 4 months. So with this business case on the background, I would like to give a quick introduction about GTS, overall of what GTS offers before moving into the details of the export self-filing implementation that we did for Sweden. SAP GTS itself is a bolt-on solution, so it is not standard SAP suite, but it's part of the SAP solution, which is adds on or interacts with the SAP ECC solution and with other SAP solutions. So it's a standard SAP solution, it's a standard interactions and interfaces with other SAP solution, but it's not part of the SAP main SAP modules. And SAP GTS, or Global Trade Services, is divided into 4 main areas. Compliance, which deals with denied party screening, embargo screening, licenses for export controls purposes, and also imports. Under customs management, both inbound and outbound custom processes are covered, and also special custom procedures like IPR, OPR, and bonded warehouse, POCC are all covered. It also involves management of the tariff codes and the commodity code. Under risk management, deals with managing the free trade regulations and preference determination of the products. Finally, electronic compliance is all about intrastat data reporting. With this introduction to GTS, we are going to look at its interfaces between SAP system and other feeder systems, and its interfaces towards the custom system and other third-party system. And this is more the technical version of the GTS and what is it, how it interacts with other system. Feeder system in this slide means SAP ECC system or any other system which is the ERP system of that organization. While Connor, while giving its introduction, spoke about Crypt Connect, which is a tool designed by Crypt to connect to any non-SAP systems. So feeder system is the basic system in which both master data and transactional data get generated or created. And SAP GTS has standard interfaces to integrate with the procurement process, sales process, all intercompany relevant process, inventory management process, in case of using special customs procedures like bonded warehouse and OPR. Also, GTS has standard interfaces to interact with feeder systems for master data management like vendor, customer for denied party screening, and for material for classification purpose. While all these data gets transferred into GTS, GTS performs its compliance checks, its customs processes based on this data that it gets from the feeder system. In addition, there are master data that are maintained in GTS, like classifications for automation purposes and default data and things like that. It is also used for management of compliance, customs, and risk management. And all this data that gets generated is then communicated either in form of a printout form for export documents or in terms of an electronic message to the customs authority or to the broker. The way the electronic message is communicated is through a form of an IDOC to an external conversion program, which could then convert it to an EDI or an XML. And GTS is able to both receive EDI and XML data into the GTS system and send the data. So we would have a two-way communication with the customs authority. The same is also possible with the broker with the new version of GTS. And also GTS is enabled to use both smart forms and Adobe forms. So those are all the technical overviews behind using GTS as the system. Moving on to export process within GTS. It starts with the master data creation. So product masters that are created in the feeder system, in our case, it was SAP ECC system, or the SAP system as it's known. So any product or customer created in the SAP ECC system gets transferred to GTS real time. If it's a customer, then the customer gets screened for denied party list, and if there is a positive check, then the customer is blocked. There is a specific transaction to review the blocked customers in GTS, and then the user would take appropriate action. And then the next process is creating the sales order, which is relevant for, in our case, for compliance check. So sales order was real-time integrated into GTS system. So when a sales order gets created in the SAP ECC system, it moves into GTS, and then it gets screened for denied party screening, embargo, and for export licenses. If there is any issues, for example, an export license is needed, then the sales order gets blocked, and then an action item and the user would review the block sales order and take appropriate action item of getting the appropriate license. And once the license is updated in the system, the sales order gets released for further processing. Once it is released, a delivery could be created, which should again be checked for exports and export compliance purposes. And then at this point, if the delivery is all good, because it mostly uses the data of the sales order, then a pro forma invoice is created. The pro forma invoice, when it's created in SAP ECC, automatically creates the export declaration document in GTS. The export declaration document in GTS would contain all relevant data to print export relevant documents like the CI and the certificate of origin, and also to communicate with the customs authority. The communication model for self-filing in this project, what we did was one of the challenges that we had was to ensure maximum automation takes place. So part of it is we have to define the communication activity sequence based on keeping on mind that we would want to make automation whenever it is possible, uh, with uh, with not ignoring any of the compliance related actions that is needed to be done. When the export declaration gets created, it, it it gets populated into an activity sequence in GTS. And for this purposes, we had 5 activity sequence for Sweden self-filing. First activity sequence that we created was a custom activity sequence, something that we configured for printing the export document. We used all the standard configurations except for the forms. The forms was self-generated based on Adobe, so it was in program. But otherwise, the export the activity sequence and the automation around automatically printing the forms and forwarding all the relevant data to the forms were all done through standard SAP GTS configurations. So the first activity was to print the export document, and at this point, we decided the forms would be automatically printed and the output would be received by the user even before logging into the GTS. What I mean by this is a pro forma invoice gets created in ECC, and then from the printout, the users receive an export CI and all other export relevant documents. At this point, the user can log into GTS and then does an incompletion check and then submits the export declaration to the Swedish Customs Authority. And that export declaration, we used the standard Seeburger as the interface between GTS and Swedish Customs. And the communication between GTS and Seeburger is established through an IDOC. And then Seeburger communicates with the Swedish Customs Authority through an XML. And once the release message, so there are 3 messages that will be received from the Swedish Customs Authority back into GTS for acceptance, for acknowledgement, acceptance, and release. So once the release message, acceptance, and the release messages are received, then what we did was automatically print the EAD form. And once the EAD form is printed, the users would just need to go ahead, collect all the documents, hand it over to the carrier, and the shipment process, the export shipment process is at that point completed. Most of the EU countries do have an automated exit confirmation process through which the exit confirmation is received into GTS. Sweden does not have it. The customs authorities themselves not. The system is old, so they do not have it. So we had to offer a standard manual solution is available in GTS, which was offered, which is to go into the Swedish Customs Authority customs website, get the date and the confirmation number and update it manually into GTS. And that was done as a weekly activity, once in a week activity. So from a process point of view, step number 2 and step number 5 were the 2 activities that was manually done. The rest were all was done in terms of, it were all automated unless there was an issue or an error where it would require an human intervention. That was one of their biggest challenges, and we tried to achieve, our maximum automation in terms of all the activity sequence wherever it is possible without compromising on the compliance part of it. So the advantage of using GTS is that the export declaration monitoring area is divided into different activity sequence, so that the export processor has a real-time view of the status of the export declaration. The processor would right away be able to tell whether an export declaration is pending, whether it has been sent to customs waiting for reply, or if there is any error that they have received from the customs authority. So this enables for a quick, easy action in terms of identifying the correct status of the declaration and then making the respective corrective actions that is needed. This is a standard offering of GTS, and we were able to fully utilize this. Finally, coming to the communication part of the GTS system, we use standard communications that have been offered by GTS. The M8000 message was offered to communicate with Sweden Customs the export self-filing. So we use that, and if you can see on the status, you should be able to see the green symbols, the color symbols. So GTS offers what is called as the some very similar colors to the traffic light. So if it is amber or yellow, that means the messages are ready to be processed. If it is green, then the message has been successfully processed. If it is red, then that means the message, there is an error, and then a user action is required. So the export processors were fully trained on this, and when they receive an export, only when they receive an error or an error message, that is when they were required to look into the export declaration, evaluate what needs to be corrected, and then make the relevant corrections. And before going into the benefits of the project, I would like to just take a minute to talk through the project itself. So our project was divided into 3 phases: our build phase, and then the testing phase, which was the most crucial phase of the project. The reason being, since we were going in for full automation, we wanted to test as much scenarios as possible, and we were able to achieve this through two different ways. One is we completely utilized the existing ECC system, identified all different processes, and then we cross-verified it with the broker that was currently doing it. Once that is done, then we developed all the relevant test scripts, and then we spent 2 weeks testing all of the relevant processes, all unique scenarios. For example, one unique scenario was a shipment to Iceland that would go through Denmark. So we had some, and then we had another unique scenario of consolidating all the shipments that was moving in Norway. So we did a lot of homework in terms of identifying all the scenarios that are relevant for us, and then and that would have impacted our automation process, and then we thoroughly tested it, and that is the most key aspect of it. And for this testing, we were able to use the users who were actually doing these processes from different plants. They were present with us for 4 days, testing the relevant processes, asking us the relevant questions, raising the relevant defects and things like that. And that was one of the key aspect of the project. So moving on to the benefits of the project, the first benefit was the cost of savings in terms of the cost that was paid to the broker. And this savings was achieved not only by moving the self-filing process in-house, but also by using the existing same export processing team, because we were able to do the automation part of GTS. While talking about the automation of the SAP GTS system, one of the main advantages that the GTS system was able to give to the organization as part of this was also standardization of the process. By implementing SAP GTS and SAP ECC already being implemented, the organization was able to reap the benefit of standardized process, global standardized process based on templates. So the same process that they used for a particular supply chain in Germany or France was able to be easily replicated for Sweden. And that was one of the advantages that was, in addition to the regular benefits that we were aiming in the project. This was one of the add-on benefits that we were able to achieve. And we were able to achieve thorough automation in the project without using, or I should say, with using minimum enhancements from the standard GTS solution. So majority of our automation was achieved by using standard GTS solution. And finally, in terms of compliance, we were able to achieve a better compliance process by just moving the export self-filing process in-house and by maintaining all the relevant master data in GTS, and also by using the GTS incompletion check, which would enable to check the export declaration document in GTS before any message or any communication is sent to the customs authority. With this, we were able to achieve all the benefits that we needed for this project. I hope you had a good overview about the export self-filing process, and now I am giving back it's the time for questions, and I'm giving back it to Connor. Connor, do we have any questions?
Thanks for that, Sam. We've had quite a few questions come through, so we'll try and get through as many of these as we can. So one of the first questions was, did you need additional authorization to do self-filing in GTS?
So GTS is a certified solution for Sweden self-filing, but the authorization had to be amended, and a test with the Sweden Customs Authority needs to be done and needs to be submitted with the Swedish Customs Authority, and then they would certify the amended authorization. So not a new authorization, but an existing authorization needs to be amended for GTS self-filing.
Okay. So we've got about 7 questions. I'm gonna probably answer 4, and then I'll get back to everybody else on email. The second question: what was the most challenging activity during this implementation?
There was 2 activities that was most challenging. The first one was analyzing the existing ECC process, and it was very critical because part of our business case was to go for full automation. So we had to do some of the upfront work on that. And our second most challenging activity was to ensure that we had a very successful communication with the Swedish Customs Authority, so that all our testing and Swedish Customs Authorities were very helpful. And they have a specific email for testing and things like that. But it requires a little bit of a patient approach with it. But we were able to work very diligently with the Swedish Customs Authority in terms of doing testing of the self-filing process, and those were, I think, the most challenging activities that we encountered in the project, apart from delivering the project in 4 months. So it was a busy schedule too.
Okay. Another one: does the export declaration step get put on hold if there are any compliance items in open status?
So what happens?
Do you want me to repeat that as well?
Yes. Can you repeat it again?
Yeah. So does the export declaration step get put on hold if there are any compliance items in open status? Open status, okay, in inverted commas.
Yes. Okay. So what happens is, what we do in GTS is we have a check of the messages or the communication. It could be either a print or a electronic communication. So that is where the check is. So that is what is put on hold. So for example, we had an automatic printing of the CI of the commercial invoice, but if a particular data is not filled, then our incompletion procedure would kick in and that message would not be printed. That is the same process for the electronic communication with the Swedish Customs Authority. The moment there is an incomplete data in the export declaration document in GTS, the user would not be able to send it to the Swedish Customs Authority and GTS would populate that message. It would say that the message is incomplete, and it will also give the relevant field that is incomplete. And this is standard GTS process. So the user would be able to click on the message, and it will take to a specific field that is not complete. And then once the user inputs it, saves it, then the message will be available for processing.
Yeah. Okay. And one more question. So, where does duty drawback fit into the SAP GTS process?
So duty drawback at this point is, I think that is something that we can take outside of this call, because currently we are just focusing on export self-filing. So can we note down that question, Connor, and we can, duty self-filing itself is a big topic, so we can come back on that.
Perfect. Okay, yeah, I will follow that one up. And there's a couple other we'll follow up on as well. Sam, thank you very much for that today. And I suppose we can close this down now. All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone, for dialing in. Cheers. Bye-bye.